How about it's Hilda Ffinch, the bird with all the answers?
Deck the halls with bells of holly, fa-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Poor old Adolph's off his trolley, fa-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. He's a bad man, he's a madman, fa-la-la-la. Merry Christmas to you. One of these days I'll get to the end of that verse. Enter!
Mill's just come, Mrs. Finch. Postman had a bit of a mishap, though.
Oh, Lord! What is it this time, Daisy? Sack too heavy? Tripped over a reindeer? Ambushed by a jelly snowman? Do put me out of my misery at once and tell.
No, I'm afraid it's the frost, Mrs. Finch. It was a bit sharp overnight and well, there's been an incident.
A what? Spit it out, girl.
I'm afraid that your old knocker come off in on his hand when he grabbed hold of it this morning. Clean off it came and took some of the paint off the door with it. Ern said there was nothing he could do. He tried pushing it back on, but it was no good. Proper brass monkey weather it is out there. He nearly got frostbite fiddling with it. Said he'll have to leave it for now or risk getting caught out in the open if the blizzard starts again, and he don't much fancy perishing in the snow like poor old Captain Scott did.
Captain Scott. Terrible business. Good-looking fellow. Impressive thighs. Well, that knocker's been hanging on with 4 fingers since William IV died, to be fair, Daisy. What's his name?
Ernie, ma'am.
Yes, that's him. What's he done with it?
Left it on the top step, ma'am. I'll pick it up later when the tea cozy's hot. Pop it inside and bring it in. Save getting chilblains.
Very well. Good thinking. Will you hear if anyone knocks at the door in the meantime?
Doubtful, ma'am. Not if I'm in the drawing room mixing your gin.
We'll throw some more wood on the fire in here and open the window just a little to listen out. But just this once, mind. Tell cook to send for the handyman. I won't have my old knocker going astray. It was touched by Lord Kitchener, you know.
Yes, ma'am. There, you'll hear if anyone comes up the drive, ma'am.
Thank you, Daisy. Now, just pass me a couple of letters from that bulging seasonal sack, would you?
Just the 2, ma'am?
Yes, just the 2 today. The vicar's calling round for a festive sherry, and he's promised me a good stuffing. I must make sure I'm ready to receive it.
Stuffing, ma'am?
Yes, he's coming at 11. It's an annual event.
Oh, right. There you go, ma'am. 2 letters.
Marvellous. On the desk, dear. On the desk.
Hope you don't mind me asking, ma'am, but...
Yes?
Will cook be getting a stuffing from the vicar too, with it being Christmas and all that, and...
Oh, yes, indeed. Traditionally, the Reverend Fishwick comes up with a good fine stuffing for cook too when the nativity approaches, and if you don't delay in bringing in the tea when he arrives, I dare say that the good man will have a little left in reserve for you too. Sage and onion, do you?
Oh, yes, thank you, ma'am.
Not at all, Daisy, not at all. 'Tis the season and all that. The vicar's largest knows no bounds at this time of year. Now, tootle along and bring some more gin, would you?
Of course, Mrs. Finch.
Right then, here we go. I wonder what cruel and unusual cards the fates have dealt to the inhabitants of Little Hope and its environs this week. Mrs. Sylvia Arbuthnot. Now then.
Mrs. C. Arbuthnot, 1 Maffican Terrace, Little Hope, Yorkshire. Dear Hilda, recently, whilst fingering Fanny by gaslight in the Little Hope Library, I came across a page where certain words, letters and numbers had been underlined. I mentioned this to my friend from 2 doors down, and she said that there's a good chance that we have a 5th columnist in our midst who is using the book to leave coded messages for a Jerry spy. Do you think it's possible, and if so, what should I do about it? Yours sincerely, Cynthia Arbuthnot.
Good job it wasn't Dick Whittington. Joy to the world. Dear Mrs. Arbuthnot, thank you for your missive. Just to be on the safe side, I popped into the Little Hope Library and looked at Fanny by gaslight myself this morning, and I'm now certain that you were attempting to decipher the booking out slip at the front of the book. I double-checked with our dear librarian, Mrs. Hinge, and she confirmed that you spent 20 minutes examining the self-same page on Tuesday last, with, as she put it, a very quizzical look on your face, as though you've been at the cooking sherry again. I note also from your address that you live at number 1 Mafeking Terrace. which puts your neighbour from 2 doors down into the frame as Miss Edna Barrel, the interesting barmaid with breath like an abandoned French winery from the Rose and Crown in the High Street. I dare say that she encouraged you in this nonsense. Really, Mrs. Arbuthnot, do try and rein it in a bit and save a little alcohol for VE Day. And on the same subject, do please try to remain sober when handing out the very terms to which our library still possesses in future. We've already lost Little Dorrit and Jane Eyre to a paper drive, and whilst I'm sure that none of us begrudge their noble sacrifice for the war effort, I'm quite sure that nobody wishes to see Fanny by Gaslight come to a sticky end on account of your heavy-handed fingering. I'm sending you, my second class, a small tin of Andrew's liver salts, Mrs. Arbuthnot. Please do feel free to indulge heavily. Yours, Hilda Ffinch. No, my name's Finch, the bird with all the answers. Enter.
Your gin, Mrs. Finch, and a packet of Craven A.
Thank you, Daisy. Well done. Is that someone coming up the drive, I hear?
3 people, Mrs. Finch. Can't see who they are, as they're all muffled up against the cold.
Not the 3 wise men, then?
Wise men? A little hope, Mrs. Finch. Ah, it's Miss Millington, Mrs. Fox, and Lady Shag Pyle from the Women's Institute, Mrs. Finch, and I think they're about to sing.
Dear Lord, anything but that.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Saviour was born on Christmas Day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. New tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. New tidings of comfort and joy. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Finch.
Have they quite finished?
I think so, Mrs. Finch. Miss Millington's just picked up your old knocker off the doorstep, though.
Well, call out and ask her to put it down at once. Oh, and wish them a very Merry Christmas while you're at it, and tell them I'll put half a crown in the box on Christmas Eve, and we'll send Cook's father's nephew down to the village hall with a saucepan for a Spitfire on Tuesday. That should do it. Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Daisy. Your mastery of Chinese whispers is clearly second to none. I'd best have another gin on the back of that tirade before I press on.
Yes, ma'am.
Lord, that gin's good. Now, letter number 2. One is positively agog to learn what else is going on in this curious place. Let me see. What the dickens?
Miss Dora Dickens, Trollope End, Slack Bottom, Greater Hope. Dear Mrs. Finch, I share my home with my great-aunt Doris, a wonderfully stoic lady who is an admirably self-sufficient character. Anyhow, I have just returned home from my weekly WI meeting, and I was greeted by the hanging corpse of a fully grown pig over our bathtub. To say it was a shock to see the big porker hanging in the bathroom is an understatement, and I wonder how on earth to broach the subject of having a bath this evening. The thought of wallowing in the bathtub with Pig Trotter's head dangling over my head makes me feel rather queasy. Please could you advise on how to broach the subject of how I may perform my necessary ablutions? Yours sincerely, Dora Dickens, Miss.
Dear Dora, if, as I suspect, your great-aunt Doris is actually Doris Curmudgeon Dickens, the former landlady of the Stoker's Arms on the moor above Greater Hope, where the best brawn in Yorkshire was to be had prior to the Meat Emporium on the High Street here in Little Hope opening, then you're skating on very thin ice indeed, my dear. Let me take you back to the great blizzard of 1913, long before my time, obviously, to the night when your great-aunt first appeared at the Stoker's Arms, having travelled alone through the deepening snow from Nottingham, on a mercy mission from her father, Mr. Sweeney Dickens of Dickens Pie Shop, High Pavement, Nottingham, carrying 2 barrels of Shipstone's India Pale Ale, a small sack of meat seasoning, and a crate of candles on her back, as Arthur, the usual drayman, had put his back out during the get-up to the Great North Road, as it were. And the horses were having none of it on account of snowballs on their hooves. Exhausted and sweating like Jack the Ripper at a surprise party held by Inspector Aberline of the Yard, Doris staggered into the Stoker's Arms at sunset on a Tuesday evening and was immediately swept off her feet by a grateful landlord and 12 thirsty steelworkers who'd left Sheffield on a shadowbang outing 3 days before and had become prisoners of the storm. None of them had seen a woman or daylight for quite some time, so Miss Dickens was quite the centre of attention at first until the storm worsened and food began to run out. For 7 days and 7 nights the gods raged against mankind. Pipes froze and village pumps came off in the hand when agitated with too much vigour. The lights of the marooned inn on the moor, bright and gay at first, quite magnificent with their Pickwickian sparkle and glitter, were seen from the church tower and greater hope to dim gradually, diminish in number, and slowly die. Finally, the day came when the storm itself blew out, and small party of men from the Greater Hope Feathered Fanciers Forum wrapped themselves up snugly, and preventing their thighs from freezing on the journey across the moor by diligently adhering to the forum's official ferret trouser leg ratio, and set out on a rescue mission to the Stoker's Arms, dragging a sledge loaded with the damson chutney, bread and lard behind them. For 5 or more hours they toiled up towards the moor, digging through the frozen precipitation like frenzied badger hogs until at last they reached the door to the inn. Bracing themselves and fully expecting to be confronted with a tableau rivaling the last moments of Robert Falcon Scott and his unfortunate friends. Price 2 shillings on admission. At Madame Tussauds they pushed the door open and peered in, only to find Doris Dickens wallowing in a tin bath, full and with enough steam to preserve her dignity thankfully, in front of a roaring fire, sipping on half-pint of pale ale and singing When the Midnight Choo-Choo Leaves for Alabama, only pausing occasionally to nibble on a slice of brawn on toast. There was not another soul to be found at the inn that day, though the Ferret Fanciers Forum searched the place from top to bottom. No easy task in itself, given that the landlord had clearly expected the storm to be bad, and had evidently stoked up enough brawn to withstand a siege. The inn's larder was overflowing with it. There were 2 large clear jars of it on the counter, in the bar, and recently cut tea plate full on the table in the kitchen. Doris explained, when questioned by Constable Crumble, a leading light in the Ferret Fanciers Forum, and thus a member of the rescue party, that the landlord and the steelworkers, concerned that they might succumb to starvation at the Stoker's Arms on account of the raging blizzard outside, none of them liked corn, apparently, they were all vegetarians, had set off en masse for the village the morning after her arrival, to try to bring help, or at very least some lettuce and a bit of cucumber for some sandwiches. And she hadn't seen hide or hair of them since, but there were no footprints outside the inn when we arrived, frowned Constable Crumb. Not so much as an indentation or undulation. The snow, replied Doris, was positively horrid. I shouldn't think they'll be seen again. The landlord left his last will and testament in the bar, just in case. He insisted on leaving the inn to me, if he failed to return. Now, would you like a meat pie? I have found some pork in the cellar, and whipped 18 of them up this morning. They're delicious. Constable Crumble declined the pie, but did have some brawn, liberally topped with damson chutney, and the rescue party had brought with them. He always maintained that it was the best brawn he'd ever tasted, an interesting texture, and even better, he was the lucky winner of Doris Dickens' Find the Gold filling in the brawn competition. Do keep it, said Doris. I always like to pop one in. You may not have any fillings now, but keep it safe, as one day you might need it. You'll never know. Clearly, Dingley Dell had become Dingley Hell, although Constable Crumble always refused to believe it, and soon afterwards gave up the police force for a position behind the flap, as it were, in Doris Dickens' newly acquired public house with the intriguing doorknobs. And so, my dear Dora, I'd be inclined to keep mum about the swinging poker in the bathroom if I were you. If you feel you need to have a word with your great-aunt Doris regarding the same, please do carry on. Personally, I would advise you to err on the side of caution, however, and perhaps just hop on in there, wink at the dangling Percy, and use the odd trotter in lieu of a nail brush. Good luck living with Mrs. Miggins. Yours, Hilda Ffinch, the bird with all the answers. Dear Lord, I feel as though I've been 12 rounds with the ghost of Christmas past after that. They're all mad in this village. Enter!
All done for the day, Mrs. Finch.
I certainly am, Daisy. Now, wrap up warmly and poodle off to the post office with those letters before lunch, would you? Remember to take a box of matches and a candle with you like the little match girl to keep warm if it comes down again and you're caught short.
Yes, Mrs. Finch, right away.
Marvellous. Oh, one moment. If you happen to see the vicar en route, tell him to get his skates on. My pond is frozen over and my knocker's dropped off, and at this stage nothing but a fine seasonal stuffing will sustain me.
Righto, Mrs. Finch. Season's greetings.
God bless us, one and all. And please, Lord, don't let Jerry bomb the gin warehouses this Christmas. I have a feeling I'll need more than usual.
If you'd like Hilda to address your problem, please go to mrsfoxgoestowar.co.uk.